Very warm welcome to the first edition of the Global Solutions Talk. I'm with my good friend Izabella Teixeira. Izabella, welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you here in Berlin. I have really some debates that are impressive to consider three things. The first one, to go this new momentum of the world, also the geopolitical dynamics in the world and how this impact climate politics, and I think that also nature politics. And this is very interesting because I used to say that the world is updating, upload things, download other things. And it's a huge challenge to manage better climate security, mine security, food security, people security, than transition as in traditional way that we used to approach this. And this is clear in the debates around here. And you have been discussing how industry and how nature, how climate is so positive of the green economy, but also the trade-offs of short-term perspectives and the difficulties or the complexities, better to say, the complexities to move the pieces, consider the realignment of the world that is happening. This is something very important to reserve. Why? Because you need also to have private sector on board. And this is something particularly important in this debate, the role of private sector in this new momentum on the world. I think that the states are changing the international order, not the private sector, okay? But indeed, you have climate risk as part of the impacts of the financial flows and also the stability of international financial systems, not the only one. And I think that it's very important to understand when you go into this debate around the world, how private sector and financial sector could be co-responsible to implement, to accelerate solutions concerning the climate crisis and also nature crisis.
I think this is extremely important, and we are also talking a lot about the fragmentation of the international systems. That's true. But on the other hand, there is something that may be less seen or less commented, especially by the large media, is that how much the fact that this year South Africa, last year Brazil, the year before India, the year before Indonesia have been sharing the G20, for example, has been allowing for a number of innovations and transformations, including the way to look at critical issues. I'm just taking one example because we have been working on that consistently, at least over the last 2 years, is the very vicious circle between asking lower income and emerging countries or middle income countries to invest more into green energy transition, green economic transformations, etc., without taking into consideration that in so many cases, this is creating more debt, and that this debt is becoming more and more unsustainable. So it's not just a question of the nature in general or climate in general, but also about how countries and entire nations, meaning also the people within those nations, can navigate rough waters. My thinking, my impression is that, and maybe also collectively ourselves, including with think tanks, we have a bit underestimated the phenomenon of climate fatigue and sustainability fatigue in numerous countries. We have little time, but I wanted to profit by the few minutes that we have here in Berlin to ask you about your vision for future cooperation of think tanks, especially as we see that Brazil and other nations from the global south are taking leadership on a number of critical issues. You were talking also about nature politics, and you have been promoting a new vision, a new approach also of expertise / private sector engagement, something that we know as T30, codename T30. Please tell us a bit more about this idea of T30.
I think that we have two provocative ideas indeed. The first one is between quotes T30, and the first idea is based on our experience on T20 and also T7, okay, that think tankers must come to provide knowledgement and expertise also for private sector. And this is not the language for public sector. Okay, so the idea is to have an international networking of think tanks that will come to provide knowledgement and also to provide political perspective for private sector engagement. And this is absolutely, we have the synergy with this, with the ambition of the president of COP30 in Brazil, that wants climate action or action agenda is part of the new equation of outcomes of the COP. So it's not only the state member negotiations, but non-state members engagement. And this is really precious, also based on the experience of G20, as I mentioned, and G7. I say, and also now it's BRICS Plus. But also I understand that it's very important that could frame things in an innovative way to repack. Because as I mentioned, that world is updating. It is absolutely critical that we're not only discussing energy transition based on the roots of the climate change cause, okay? But if you go to the roots of climate change solutions, okay, nature matters. So the idea to have land transition, it's not only about agriculture or restoration or nature-based solutions. It's about, for example, mining, critical materials, critical mining industry, how we would like to need to appropriate of nature to provide solution when we go to electrification, decarbonization, and also energy transition. So we have energy transition plus land transition to discuss climate transition. And my last point, we cannot forget, this is also our understanding that when we go to environmental protection, not necessarily this means climate protection. We need really to figure out how climate crisis now, in the future, is happening now. And my personal experience says that we need to stop moving the past. Okay, we need to have new ambitions consider the future. And it is the way that we need to figure out better the role of trades or the trade-offs and how it could connect things in the case of international trade and supply chains and geopolitical power and energy, how this will come into the world, connecting climate and nature. This is very interesting. That's why I'm provoking this debate in Brazil and internationally considering the private sector into search and also the idea of land transition perspective to join people, new brains, new dynamics, not only to discuss biodiversity as we used to discuss in the past.
And I think here there is something also very, very important because sometimes the format of COP discussions or other big summits, people are a bit tired to see like dozens of thousands of people coming in. And then at the news, there is the drama of the conclusion or not the conclusion. And then it's presented as a bit disappointing. That's, I think, a very biased view because when you are participating to a COP, there is a genuine energy and the need to share good experience is absolutely critical. However, when you are talking about nature politics, while this is not new, I think this is absolutely critical because when we visited Brazil last year during the G20 Brazil and the Brazilian Center for International Relations, thanks to you especially, on many occasions we had the opportunity to think and rethink about the transformations and the policy that could be applied to such a large mega territory or mega ecosystem as the Amazon region, which is facing a number of challenges, right? And the last couple of years also historic droughts. And when you put those ecosystems, like planetary scale ecosystems, in perspective on the global map, like the Amazon region, like the Himalayas and the changing regimes of snow and glaciers and the impacts on over 2 billion people, the issue of nature and nature politics becomes very concrete. And without the private sector and without also aligning and using think tanks as bridges and drivers, right, with the public spheres, the private sector and people, I don't think that we can overcome these so-called planetary boundaries. We will be stuck. Whereas we need, as you say, to invent some future ways to deal with a large population, but also somewhat limited resources, but also resources that can be reproduced. So if we had one message to share, profiting by sitting down together here, what would it be in a minute? How would you like, if you meet someone outside of Berlin or in the street, what should we say to that person about still being hopeful about interacting internationally? What would be the main message?
I think that don't give up the future.
Mm.
We can fix it. We can not because we you're prepared to have a bad future, but to be less vulnerable. And you cannot forget, because climate risk, nature risks will be there. It's different. It's absolutely different. That's why I suggest to frame things different way, to have an open-minded approach. And more than this, we cannot forget democracy. Okay, when we go into the society with less alternative, we are narrowing. We are narrowing the democracy, the alternative for the new generations, and this is very critical. That's why we need to work hard today, okay, to understand how the future will impact, okay, our lives today. And this is the core message. We need to work today hard if you want to make the difference in the future.
Don't give up our future.
Don't give up our future.
Thank you, Izabella.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.